We've been spoiled over the past 10 years. During that time, the stock market has averaged about a 15% return per year. That is insanely good. But here's the problem. A lot of people see that number and just assume that the next 10, 20, or 30 years will look the same. And if you build your retirement plan on the wrong assumptions during the accumulation phase of life, it can cost you in two very different ways. If you overestimate returns, you'll end up behind on the savings you actually need for retirement. If you underestimate, you could end up saving way too much, which means cutting back on life today and missing out on money you could have actually enjoyed along the way. So the question is, what return should you actually plan for? When it comes to retirement planning, even a small difference in the return you assume can completely change the outcome. If Lando saves $500 per month for 30 years and expects a 7% average annual return, then he'll end up with about $566,000. If Oscar saves the same amount for 30 years, but expects to earn an average of 10% per year, then he'll end up with about $986,000. That's a $420,000 difference from just a 3% change in the number they each assume. Now think about what that really means. If Oscar overestimates and plans on 10%, but only gets 7%, he'll fall short of his target. In fact, if we assume a simple 4% withdrawal rate in retirement, that's $16,000 less per year he can spend. Imagine being forced to cut your budget by $16,000 right now. Even if his assumptions are off by 1%, then he's down by $169,000. And if he's off by 2%, he's down by $307,000. While both of these amounts aren't as bad as the $420,000, it is still a major problem. This is why getting your assumptions right is so critical. A couple of percentage points doesn't sound like much, but over decades of compounding, they can change the entire retirement picture. Now, even if you pick a return assumption that looks reasonable, there's another problem that trips a lot of people up. When we project future returns, it's really difficult for our brains to actually grasp what those numbers mean decades from now. I can tell you that if you invest $510 per month and earn a 10% average annual return, you'll end up with $1 million in 30 years. On the surface, that sounds incredible. $1 million carries significant value. But what does that amount actually mean? It is so far away, so it's really tough to tell. In 30 years, inflation will erode its purchasing power, making that amount less impressive. This is why there's going to be a larger number of millionaires in the future, not because people suddenly became financial geniuses, but because inflation inflated the scoreboard. Here's the reality. Over the last 100 years, the stock market's nominal return has averaged about 12% per year, but inflation has averaged about 3% over that same period, which means the real return is closer to 9%. That small 3% difference is massive when you're looking at decades of compounding. If you ignore it with your expected returns, you're planning for dollars that look great on paper, but don't hold the same purchasing power when you actually need them. Think about it. At just a 2% annual inflation rate, $1 million in 2055 could only be worth about $550,000 in today's dollars. So when you're choosing what return assumption to use, the real question isn't just what is the return, it's is this before or after inflation? Because if you're not adjusting, you're just lying to yourself. And this is my big issue with the advice to run your numbers at the historical 12% return. It sells people on this millionaire dream, but when they finally get there, it's a letdown. And that false promise can sometimes do more harm than good. It's kind of like when I was talking to this girl on a dating app a few years ago. Her pictures, they told one story, but when I met her in person, let's just say that reality did not line up. I will let you all speculate in the comments down below how reality didn't line up. But that's pretty much what a pre-inflation assumption does to your retirement plan. Now, I am all for encouraging people to invest more, so I get the behavioral side of showing those big, exciting numbers. But at what cost? If the dream you're selling sets people up for disappointment, maybe it's the wrong dream. And not adjusting for inflation is just one problem. Using something like the 12% as your assumption comes with a whole set of other issues that can throw your plan way off course. First, that 12% figure is based on nearly 100 years of stock market history, which sounds great until you realize that nobody is actually investing for 100 years. We're not immortal investors. We're real people with different time horizons. The stock market is less of a smooth escalator ride and more of a volatile mess where your actual returns will hinge on the luck of when you start investing and when you actually need your money. That 100-year average smooths over brutal downturns, bubbles, and lost decades that could wreck your portfolio if your timing just straight up sucks. Check this out. So we know that nominal returns over the past 100 years has been 12%, and the real return, so after inflation, is 9%. Here are the yearly real returns and how many years hit each level. I find it so interesting that over 100 years, only one year, 2016, actually hit exactly 9%. You'd expect more quote-unquote average years, right? Nope. Most years, returns are either way higher or way lower. It's a solid reminder that you almost never get smooth averages in just one year. Hitting the exact long-term average in any single year is statistically rare. Now, none of this is to say that we should throw out that whole data set, but at least recognize the reality that what matters more is your personal timeline, since no one is investing for a full century. So let's zoom in on chunks of time that match our lives, like rolling periods of 10, 15, 20, and 30 years. They'll expose the whole range of outcomes, so you don't go around expecting 12% or even 9% real returns every single decade. The chart for 10-year periods over the past 100 years shows returns bouncing from -2% all the way up to 19%. Most of the time, you're landing between 4 and 12%, with 8% popping up a solid 10 times. But that -2% happened once, and 19% was a rare high. Think of this time period in terms of closer to retirement, saving for a car, or a wedding over a decade. Some stretches treat you great, while others leave you scraping by. 10 years for us is a long freaking time, but it is not for the stock market. It's a bit of a wild card, even though it feels like a lifetime in our human brains. Those swings from -2% to 19% show that the market can throw curveballs whenever the heck it wants. Now let's look at 15-year rolling periods. The returns range from 1 to 16%, with a big bunch between 6% and 11%, and 9% showing up 11 times. That 1% average annual return stings a little bit though. It shows up in 7 different 15-year rolling periods, all because someone happened to be investing at the wrong time in history. With returns ranging from 1 to 16%, the outcomes are all over the place. Low returns can slow your progress, high ones can spike it, and a tough start might throw things way off. Alright, at 20 years, think retirement or a big life change. The returns range from 2 to 14%, with most stacking up between 6 and 11%, and 10% hitting 11 times. That 2% low shows that you can still lag if you start during tough times, but 14% is a nice reward for sticking it out during 4 different rolling periods. Most of the returns are in the 7% plus range, but we've still got about 24 different periods below that return. Finally, in the 30-year rolling periods, the returns range from 5% to 12%, with a huge pile at the 7 to 10%, and 9% towering at 26 times. That 5% low means even 30 years can drag if you hit a rough patch early on, but 12% highs show big payoffs are possible. Okay, let's put all 4 charts on screen right now to take a second look at the range of outcomes that we've seen. It's easy to get excited about the 9% average showing up 26 times in those 30-year periods, or all of the numbers on the right side of each chart. But don't overlook the other side. Every rolling period has quite a few times where the average annual return was well below 9%, like -2% over 10 years or 1% over 15. Even though 20 and 30-year periods look steadier and we've had strong returns over the past 5, 10, and 15 years, future returns are still unknowable. The past does not lock in what's coming next. So after looking at the range of returns across all of those rolling periods, the big takeaway is that instead of trying to perfectly predict your future returns, you just need to plan responsibly. Because the trade-off is this: overestimate your future returns and you risk falling behind on saving and having to delay retirement. Or underestimating your returns and you risk working longer than you actually need to, giving up lifestyle and freedom along the way. The goal is not to nail the exact number. It's to pick a reasonable assumption, plan around it, and adjust as you go. So what returns should you expect if you do want to take a more responsible approach? A lot of experts will tell you that the stock market is overvalued right now. And to be fair, they've been saying that it's bubble-like for the past 12 years. But also to be fair, valuations today are at levels that we've only seen before market crashes like 1929, 2000, and 2008. If that's true, it could mean lower returns in the future. But the question is, how much lower? And the honest answer is nobody actually knows, and I'm not going to try to pretend like I do either. But if you agree with that perspective, it makes sense to take the long-term historical real average of around 9% and discount it a little bit. A simple way to do this is to use a conservative real return like 5, 6, or 7%, and then run the numbers with a plus or minus 1% variation. To do this, you can pull up any sort of compound interest calculator. Here's mine from my personal finance bundle. In this case, we'll say we've got someone who's 35, they want to retire at 60. Right now, they've got $100,000 in their investments. They can contribute $1,000 per month, not 10,000. And the average annual return that they want to assume real, so post-inflation, is going to be, we'll say 6%, the conservative. Now, they can choose the variation. They want to go plus 1% and minus 1%. So they put 1% here. And in this case, if they get the 6% average annual return, they'll have about $700,000. If they get the variance below, so 5% average annual return, they'll have about $600,000. This individual can say, you know what, I'm not really happy with the 700,000 or the 600,000. Yeah, the 800,000 would be nice if it gets 7% average annual returns. But let's assume that it's not going to get that. I'm not really happy with those bottom two, or the average and the variance below case. So let's say maybe I can invest $1,250 per month. So let's see what that looks like. Ooh, okay, I'm actually a little bit happier with that average return, but I'm still not happy with that variance. So they can either add more per month. Okay, maybe I can get away with investing $1,500 per month. Okay, that brings them up the average to $1 million and the variance below about pretty close to $900,000. Or this individual can say, you know what if I'm okay working until I am 65? We can go for 30 years. Okay, that might be an option, but you know what? I don't want that to be an option, so we're going to go back to 25 years. But I know that is an option just in case returns happen to be at the variance below. This is something you should do and you can do in some sort of compound interest calculator you can get online or in my personal finance bundle. What I like about this method is you're not betting on just one outcome. You're looking at a range of possibilities so you can make smarter adjustments now and along the way. And here's why it's almost better to always assume lower. If you plan for 6% and the market gives you 7%, you're ahead. That's a great problem to have. You can either retire earlier or ease off contributions. But if you plan for 10% and the market only gives you 7%, you are way behind, and catching up is a lot harder than easing back. The important part of all of this is checking in on your plan at least once per year. Run the numbers, see if you're ahead or behind, and adjust. I remember a few years ago I was talking to a guy who was complaining that he regretted saving so much money. He said that he would have rather spent more and saved less when he was younger. First of all, what a silly thing to complain about. He clearly was not checking in on his plan, otherwise he would have known when he was actually quote-unquote ahead. Second, this is a classic example of a cognitive bias called resulting, which Annie Duke talks about in her book, Thinking in Bets. Resulting happens when we judge the quality of a decision based only on its outcome instead of the reasoning behind it and the available information at the time. In this case, his investments grew more than he had expected, so now he regrets saving as much as he did, which is ironic because he made a logical choice with the information he had at the time when he was younger. What makes this even more eye-opening is that the outcome could have gone the complete different direction. If the market had tanked early, he might have been kicking himself for not saving more when he was young. Either way, he would be feeling regret just for opposite reasons. And that is the biggest trap with resulting. We judge quote-unquote good decisions as bad just because they didn't lead to the outcome that we wanted, or we call quote-unquote bad decisions quote-unquote good because we got lucky. Annie Duke compares it to poker. You can make a statistically smart bet and still lose on a bad draw. That doesn't mean that the bet was wrong. And it's the same with retirement planning. A sound process matters more than whether the market gives you an unexpectedly high or low return in a given stretch of time. If your plan is built on a reasonable assumption, reviewed regularly, and adjusted when needed, it's a good plan regardless of the short-term outcomes. With all of that being said, if you think expecting a real return of 5, 6, or 7% is too low, then go higher. I couldn't care less either way because at the end of the day, it's your money and I'm not your daddy. At least I hope I'm not. So do what you want with your money. You're the one who has to live with the consequences of your decisions, not me. But I will warn you that if you invest in too many funds, then you're setting yourself up for a future disaster, which I show you how in this video to your left. Hit that like button before you go. I'll see you in the next one, friends. Done.